Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know me, I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Greg Freeman. I founded Data Literacy Academy a few years ago. Have since built a team that I'm really proud of, and I think there's so many great people in this business. One of whom is Ant, who I will allow to introduce himself right now.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. My name's Ant Burton. I'm the head of strategy here at Data Literacy Academy, fast approaching my 1 year anniversary. And what a year it's been. Really excited to talk on the webinar today about data literacy and how to assess it within org. So I'll throw it back to Greg. But yeah, look forward to getting into it.
Awesome. So, session outcomes from today. We firstly want to help people understand things to think about before the assessment. So, understanding the strategic imperative for an assessment and having a plan for what you'll deliver following it, which is a really important element of what you need to do in order to be successful with, I suppose, extracting the value from doing an assessment phase. During the assessment, how to leverage a structured approach with a framework which we've got, but it's going to teach you to either do it yourselves or you can obviously partner with us on it. And then after the assessment, having set out what will deliver, how are we going to use the insights from the assessment to dictate and steer the direction we take with the data literacy, AI literacy, fluency and culture program. So those are the things we'll cover, and then we'll dive into a Q&A, as I mentioned earlier. First of all, let's just, as we always do when we start these webinars, let's share our lens on data literacy. So on the left-hand side, you've got the fairly well understood, fairly prolific definition of data literacy. And that's the Gartner definition. I think it's the industry standard definition, which is the ability, and I'm going to need a breath in this usually when I do this. The ability to read, write, and communicate data in context, including an understanding of data sources and constructs, analytical methods and techniques applied, and the ability to describe the use case, application, and resulting value. So the way we see that is not to say that that isn't a good definition of data literacy. It probably is. We just feel it's been very much written by a data professional. So a few years ago at Gartner, clearly somebody who's very data literate, data fluent themselves, sat down and said, "What is data literacy?" Okay, it's what I am. What am I? I'm all these things. I don't necessarily use punctuation and sentencing as well as I could. And here's the definition. So that's fine. But actually, a lot of what we see as we get wider and wider into the organization and we go deeper and deeper into different teams, frontline workers, all those types of things, so many people, and there's a big body of research out there that suggests it's 80% plus of people are just nowhere near even the ground zero stages of that definition. So when we're thinking about how to assess the organization, we can't just assess those things because there's a couple of levels that we see below that set the foundations for success in data literacy and culture. And that is the idea that actually the biggest barriers to people becoming successful in this space are confidence in understanding data, feeling like confident talking about it, even understanding the value of it. Then having the mindset of waking up every day and seeing their business problems as data problems, because there's no point understanding data, working with data, taking action with data, if you don't actually think of how it's going to help your business problems and help you in your day-to-day. So when we're building our assessments, we want to be thinking not just about those hard skills, which can be the direction that a lot of data professionals take when they're setting out on this journey. It's actually covering those things that are in the Gartner definition, but also exploring and allowing people to explore in their responses, things like confidence, mindset, behaviors. And to be honest, the best way, as Ant will describe a bit later, the best way to reflect the use of data and the maturity of the data literacy is actually about the applied behaviors and those types of things. But data literacy, exactly what Gartner said, but with a kind of lower set of foundations around confidence, mindset, and behaviors. And then we've got the data and AI literacy curve. We can't get away from the fact that AI literacy has become as big a topic as data literacy quite quickly. And we've always considered it part of a continuum anyway. So, in our minds, pre the absence of data literacy, you've probably got a continuum related to digital literacy. If someone can't switch on a mobile phone or a laptop, they're going to really struggle to get the value from data and AI. So we've got to take them on that journey first if you've got people who are at that level of understanding. But when we get into the data literacy space, we've then got this continuum into AI literacy. And this is a people adaptation of the data maturity curve. So, in a lot of senses, we see that you don't have to be hard skills data literate in order to make the most of a tool like generative AI these days. So, we've got a bit of a kind of shaping of the continuum that has AI coming in earlier than some of the pure data skills, and then going on to that world of data fluent, data science fluent, AI fluent, which is a whole different landscape. What you've got to consider is you need to understand where people land on this continuum. That's really within the assessment what you're trying to find out. Where are they today? And is that as low down the spectrum as they just don't get why you're even asking them about data, or as far up the continuum as do they show and display data fluent skills, behaviors, techniques, etc. So trying to place people on this continuum is a very important part of this, and that's what a good, effective, well-considered scoring system will allow you to do. So we're going to get going with a bit of a poll out to you, the audience. So where is your organization at in its data literacy journey? All we want to know, in your own opinion, based on the poll, where is your organization at in its data literacy journey? If you can get your answers in, Sarah or Jemima in our team in the background will launch it. Hopefully, it's appeared for you now, and we'll get to some of the results as we go through. I'm hoping at some point this will convert into an answering view for me. Just telling me I can't vote, so I can't see the answers. Sarah, is there a way that I can see the answers, or do you want? Ah, there we go. There we go. There we go. So we've got 47% of people are building the foundations. 34% of people are scaling use and awareness. So I guess a lot of people feeling they're around that 3 out of 5 level. Integrating data into culture, just 6%. Advancing all departments, love to see it. I'd be really, really interested to know what that business is and how you've managed to achieve advancing all departments. Maybe a data consultancy or something, which you'd hope everyone would be advancing all departments. But I think we've still got that perception, and this is something we'll come on to as we go through the conversation. A fairly well understood lack of people maturity is part of the premise of what we're talking about here. And it's really good for people to recognize that and acknowledge it. In a lot of senses, what we're trying to show here is that you already have an understanding of where you are. And Ant and I will talk about the fact that this assessment, for a lot of cases, it's just a bit of a tick box process to show that challenge to the rest of the business, those who need to see the business case, those who need to see how progress will be measured. But I think most people who work in data and spend a lot of time with their business partners, you kind of already know that we've got a problem here. The assessment can just be to show the evidence of that. So, Ant, is this you?
It's me.
Yeah, I'll hand over to Ant so that he can talk you through this piece of information.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so I think as Greg alluded to, often there is an intuition internally that a problem already exists. But I think if we take a little step back to start with and think about how we might define a data literacy assessment, many organizations, when they're looking at the data, they tend to start with infrastructure capabilities, what tools are in place, what systems are used, and like Greg alluded to earlier, that higher end of the curve. But that often misses one of the biggest variables, which is the people. And a data literacy assessment should be a more consultative tool. And by that, we mean not just a static survey or a technical audit. It should be an assessment designed to uncover how people actually engage with data in their everyday work. And this then goes beyond theory and that, technically, this is what, the organization is able to do, and actually focuses on consequentially what is happening. It should explore confidence, behaviors, access, and mindset, from how people make decisions to how they collaborate with the data team, whether they feel safe asking questions or challenging assumptions. And I think, unlike a traditional assessment that would kind of hand you a score and move on and be that tick box that Greg mentioned, a data literacy assessment should form part of a broader conversation so that you can interpret the results in context, because low confidence a low confidence score in one team might reflect tooling, but another point it might reflect culture or leadership. So it enables you to start to build that holistic picture of what probably your intuition and your gut is telling you from that experience. It also should be anonymized, and scalable, and intentionally designed to uncover like what's really happening beneath the surface. And by that I mean not just like what can people use by way of data technically, but do they use it, and what is getting in their way if they don't. So ultimately, it will complement things like technical assessments by giving you that people insight needed to make your data strategy actually work. Because capability, as we've mentioned, without confidence, or access without clarity, doesn't actually drive change.
Got it. And just going to pause on a couple of things there, just to maybe bring a bit more to life, I guess.
Sure.
First of all, let's start with what I think is the easier of the two questions, which is just giving some clarity on why anonymization is so important, and what that allows the learner or the employee to feel, and therefore brings more value to the assessment.
Yeah, I think a great question, and I'm sure lots of people in this audience will be tacitly aware of it. But I suppose the technical concept that you were trying to avoid there with anonymity is social desirability. People feel that if they are having to put their name against a certain answer or set of responses, they will be being probed to answer it in a certain way. And if we want to get an accurate assessment of where things are, we ultimately we want to try and remove that. I think one of the other things to consider in that regard as well is where typically some of these assessments are done kind of face to face in interviews, particularly where third parties come in and they sit down with bodies of people. That again can add to that social desirability where you feel like I have to give this person an answer, otherwise my job's on the line. And that's ultimately what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that safe spaces phrase you used, doesn't it? Like, this
So
has to be a safe space. Otherwise, I mean, we'll talk a little bit later about why this data will be biased anyway, because of the subjectivity of the assessment, and because of the types of people who answer. But to create a safe space for that subset of minority who might not feel like data's for them, but they still want to give that opinion, it has to be that safe space. In terms of then helping to people to think if they want to do this assessment themselves effectively versus partnering with us, can you give one or two examples of how you mean about measuring behaviors and analyzing behaviors, not just theory, and what types of example measures have we got in there that are behaviors focused rather than theory focused?
yeah, so I think like theory focus would lean much more on the technical or capability side. So, what does having a tooling, having a Power BI, system, for example, enable you to be able to do X, with Y input, and somebody then understands that, that would theoretically give you the value that you desire. However, when you focus on questions more in relation to, let's say, I'll give you a practical example, would be collaborating with the data team, asking people, actually, do you know how to access the data team? Do you know how to reach out to them? Like, how much have you done that in the last X period of time? That actually then functionally shows you what are you actually doing in terms of
Yeah.
behaviors.
I think that's super interesting. So many data teams would ask a question, which is, can you access this data or something to assess the maturity? They can, but have they? I think it's really the flip of that lens, right? Like, yes, that like, is this dashboard available in Power BI? Well, yeah, it is. Have I ever logged into Power BI to access it or done that more than once? No, I've not. So what are we assessing there? The availability of the dashboard or the behavior and the maturity of the user? So I think that's a really good example.
So I think tying back to what we discussed before, and like, why do we need an assessment? Organizations, I think in particular CDOs, CIOs, other senior data leaders, they usually have a good instinct where things aren't quite working, built on years of experience, right? I mean, I spoke about this kind of ad nauseum, but I'm sure many people here have read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He talks about intuition, and people think that like that isn't a type of data, and it for sure is. But it's built over years of understanding an environment and knowing what the rules are. So that is something to listen to. But just because like adoption is low, or maybe like teams are requesting reports on accident, it doesn't mean that that is proof per se. So without that direct input from the people involved, those signals, I suppose, often remain at a surface level, and an assessment could help you dig a little bit deeper to see where we want to go from that. So it gives you a baseline or a benchmark, a snapshot of how people feel about using data, how often they're relying on it, and how confident they are at interpreting it, and how they collaborate with others, especially the data team, as we mentioned. It also like it should be lightweight and widely accessible, and I think we'll come on to this later, Greg, when we talk about like next step. But it's got to allow you to engage in a broad cross section of the organization so that you can see the patterns, and not just have the data leaders perspective, or particular project stakeholders who are obviously going to be biased towards pushing things in certain directions. So that reach is what lets you spot the pattern, make comparisons, maybe across teams, maybe across capabilities, and see the system as a whole, not just isolated anecdotes. And it then helps you understand things like, are decisions genuinely data informed, or are people actually reverting to instinct? Are teams clear like what good practice looks like? And is there a shared language? We put that's earlier down on the data literacy curve. Is there a shared language? When we talk about things like data, or getting a little bit more nuanced metrics or success, pertaining specifically to the organization. Or on the screen, we referenced the Dunning-Kruger effect. Greg, maybe I'll just throw it back to you quickly for this portion, just so I'll let you define it, given that we talk about this a lot.
My favorite topic.
Yeah.
So I think this is an interesting one because we're here today telling you that there's a subjective assessment that we sell, I guess, as part of a program, or more likely you'll do one internally and it will be subjective. But we're also very clear that this isn't the best way to do assessments. It's just far easier and far faster and far better understood than the other way of doing it. And this all comes down to the Dunning-Kruger effect. So Dunning-Kruger is the concept that the less we know about a subject, the more we think we know about it. And in all of our experience and my degrees in teaching, and I've been exposed to teaching a lot of different subjects, I would say data is the biggest victim to Dunning-Kruger I've ever come across. It's the reason that if you walk into your finance team today, and sorry if there's any finance people on the call, most people in finance, if you ask them whether they're data literate, would look confused by how you could even ask them that question. They've spent their entire career with numbers, metrics in Excel, but actually, what they don't know is the depth and breadth of data as a skill set, and that true data fluency is a country mile away from that. What you then get by asking people the gaps they've got, and we obviously, with the way we've structured our subjective assessment, making it more behaviors focused, have tried to curate something that protects against this a bit. But if you just ask people, can you do this? Are you good at this? Do you feel confident with data? They'll say yes most of the time, because most people have a perception that their experience of data is what data is. So you've got to curate an assessment which bears in mind the fact that most people will over egg their own competence. And that's why leaning on this behaviors questioning rather a mindset questioning rather than the do you or don't you, can you or can't you, is more effective because of that Dunning-Kruger piece.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think then that ties nicely into, the wrapper on this and why do you need an assessment? Because, we're thinking about people investment, we're thinking about tools and technologies. Tech is important, of course, but unless you understand the behaviors and like, digging closer into what Greg's just mentioned, and the blockers and the cultural dynamics that people are facing, you might not be deploying that technology effectively, and you risk treating symptoms, not causes, and spending sometimes a shed load of money in the process, potentially damaging your own credibility within the business, investing in something that you weren't optimized for at the beginning. So, an assessment gives you a broader perspective, a people lens that helps you balance investment between tools, between systems, and capability building. And rather than relying on just that intuition, you get a grounded insight, and from that, then you can start to plan with precision.
Yeah, and I'll always come back to this question that is probably my favorite question to ask when people let me talk on stage to CDOs and CIOs. If you look at your budget and you have spent 10x or 20x or God forbid 100x on technology, engineering headcount, data scientists versus what you've invested in your culture, your literacy, the wider business people, then you've got a problem. And what this will help you do is ensure that that 10x, 20x, 100x is actually being delivered and is delivering value. And most people, unfortunately, sat in this room will look at their budgets or think about the budget of the person they report into. And I bet it is at least 10x that you've spent on technology versus people. It'll way often be more than that. So you've got to get this right. And this is going to be part of your like benchmarking, as Ant said, to make sure that next year and the year after and the year after, you actually invest in the humans as well, because they're the ones that are going to be using it to deliver the value that you've promised.
So, why is this a way that you can start? And I guess like initial caveat, like this doesn't mean that there aren't ways that you can dive further down into the deep end. And we'll come on to that shortly in terms of your maturity and your readiness and where you're at. But I suppose if you imagined your organization's data ecosystem as a map, right now you have a whole range of directions that you could go in: training, tooling, hiring, even restructuring. And like we said, you'll have an intuition about what's most urgent. But unless you know where you're starting from, even the best instincts can sometimes send you off course. And fundamentally, assessment helps you drop a tentative pin in the map, not in terms of just technology or infrastructure, but in terms of how ready your people are to engage with data. Um, it then gives you a clear sense of where teams are confident, where collaboration is working, but also where cultural blockers might be holding things back. That might be something structural, like poor access to tools or technology, but it could also be psychological fear, like we said about those safe spaces, a fear of asking the wrong question. People have that they don't like to feel like they're stupid, but they want to know more and they want to do better. And this hopefully helps you start to unpick some of those threads. Or it's often a sense that the data team is this black box that just can't be accessed. And I suppose what makes this a powerful starting point is it lays the foundation then for everything else. Whether that is a learning program, tooling investment, a leadership initiative, right? Like that's definitely a way that you might go. This gives you evidence to say, here's what people need, here's where we can start, and here's how we can then track that progress over time. It also gives you the ability to start to build a business case, and we'll come onto this in more detail as well, backed by real responses, something leaders can get behind that's grounded in reality, not just some external benchmarks that somebody's provided for you.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I'll always come back to here is this definitely isn't the only way to start. Actually, for a good amount of time now as a business, we have sold or offered as a service building a data literacy strategy, which is a much deeper data literacy, like a much deeper people strategy than you may do in just a high level data strategy or a kind of top level data strategy. The thing I always say about this is only spend money on that with us or anybody else if you have to. And what I mean by that is if you're in a business where everybody needs a nice slide deck from an external partner before they sign off a downstream program, then that's a sensible way to spend money. If you're not in that type of organization and you've just got real confidence that you should get going, you don't have to do an assessment. You can actually jump straight to the kind of the depths of running the program, and a lot of that stuff will come out during the program anyway, a lot of the challenges, a lot of the behavioral gaps, etc. But if you are in the type of organization who will say, look, we're objecting to this because we haven't got that baseline of evidence, that baseline of evidence that, as we've discussed earlier from our little poll, we all know anyway. Everyone in this room knows there's a data people problem or a people problem with data. But if what you need is the evidence to show that, then the assessment as a service or the assessment doing it yourself becomes a really sensible thing to do because it gives you a baseline. Either way, it isn't the only way to start. We've had tons and tons of programs that have not done the assessment. They've still been incredibly successful because they just knew that it was a problem that had to be solved. So yeah, it's a gateway to it, but it's not the only way, and probably not the most common one as we see it. Um,
Getting into the value for your business now. So you'll see the kind of like the four headlines on the slide there. Fundamentally, you want to know, what does this actually unlock, for the business and for your role. I think first and foremost, visibility. You get the people first view, how data is used, where it's avoided, and where it's misunderstood. That's a great place to start. It's kind of like broadening your purview to be able to open you up to the maximal amount of perspectives as possible before you then want to go and zoom in. Secondly, starts to build some clarity. So you can pinpoint where those blocks exist, whether that's a team that lacks confidence, maybe in interpreting data specifically, or a function that always relies on the data team instead of actually building some of those self-serve internal habits that you'd otherwise expect that they have. Or, as we've alluded to earlier, a department that really estimates how data-driven it really is, and they need to bring themselves back on track to make that part of the culture. Third, and this is something we talk about often, momentum. Right, we want to create that inertia, we want to create that excitement, you want to create that energy, because this isn't just insights for insight's sake. Anybody can do that. This feeds directly into learning plans, tool design, hiring decisions, cultural interventions, and this can be the catalyst for that change. If you think about it, it's just going to be a survey that sits there statically, you send it out, and you don't do anything with it. No point. Like, you want it to be a positive change for energy, and then from there, going back to what Greg said, it allows you to shape your data strategy around what people actually need and not what the org chart says or what the platform roadmap says that they should need. It starts to help you shape that, in a collaborative way with your insights and then what the data is starting to tell you. And lastly, it starts to help you tell a compelling story upwards. When leaders ask, SLT come along, budget holders, why should we invest in data literacy? You have an answer, and it's supported by data, beyond just anecdotes. And we know that intuition will be felt strongly by you, and you'll be right. Like, fundamentally, you will be right. But like, we all know that, like, putting a business case together, it relies more on that. So this helps you in terms of the value for the business, show where the gaps are, connect them to real business pain points, slow decisions, poor decision making, bottlenecks. And then crucially, then it starts to enable you to show where you want to focus next. So the data becomes like a shared language, not just this resource that's tucked away, kind of held niche by yourselves. And I suppose, like, what considerations should your assessment include? So to be effective, whether if you're going to build this yourself, like Greg said, you can come and collaborate with us, absolutely. But by all means, take this on board to think about how you want to shape it yourselves. To be effective, the assessment needs to be intentional. Like, first and foremost, like I said, if you're just going to put something together for the sake of it, like, don't bother. It's not about asking, do you use data and moving on. It's about understanding, like, how people use the data, but more importantly, often understanding why sometimes they don't. I think you need to consider what behaviors you're trying to influence, whether that's building confidence, strengthening collaboration, encouraging curiosity, or embedding those best practices. And so the balance of questions that you offer matters too, because you want a blend of behavioral type questions, perception, so self-perceived or external perception, and contextual questions, so it captures the kind of the nuance of the organization as well, enough to start to reveal patterns, but not so many that people disengage. And I suppose that's when then length becomes a key. You could ask questions, 100 plus. I think somewhere around a good 20 to 30 structured questions with factor analysis, if possible, keeping things focused, which still gives a rich insight, but isn't so long that it risks like losing people and their engagement, because that broader perspective, as we mentioned earlier, is kind of ultimately what's desirable. And then there's trust. If people think the assessment will be used to judge them, as we mentioned at the start, they just won't answer honestly. So the framing, the anonymity, the messaging that we'll talk about as well, that sits alongside the distribution of an assessment is really, really important. And all of that needs to reassure people that this is about support and not just scrutiny. Yes, you want to take a critical lens to it, but this is about ultimately helping people help themselves and help the business. So when it's done well, the output isn't just a list of scores. It becomes a meaningful signal, and a guide to help shape how you develop, scale, and sustain a data culture that works for your people, not just for your platforms.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up on a couple of those points actually. I think just some like experience points that I've seen as we've been, I guess, observing people build their own internally. That length piece becomes such an important challenge because I guess natural enterprise business behaviors is to spread the input as far and wide as you possibly can. It makes everyone feel included. They've had their opinion. It's going to impact their teams, their departments. But actually, the challenge there becomes, oh, well, that department just wanted to add two more questions. That team just wanted to add three more questions. And by the time you've collated everybody's opinions, they've you're like 80 questions and you're like, we started with 15 and we're now at 80. So you've got to be really careful about how many people you bring into the conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be done to the business, but asking everybody for their opinion is going to mean that the assessment becomes too long. People don't want to complete it. A lot of the time, you've got to put yourself in the shoes of this isn't people's day job. The people filling this assessment in, data isn't their day job. It's a minimal part of the job for most people. Some of them don't even consider it their job at all. So if you ask them too many questions, they're just going to switch off. If you were sent a marketing assessment that had 50 questions in it, you wouldn't answer them. You'd open it, you'd go, what, one of 50? Absolutely not. So we've got to be super clear that it's got to be concise enough. And then I think this is a really good time to pick up that conversation around, believe it or not, the people that respond to this will be the ones in the business, on the business side, who are better at data than the ones who don't respond to it. And that always seems crazy to data teams because they've got massive concerns about the people on the business side that they speak to every day about data. They're like, oh, that person doesn't know how to ask the right questions. Every time they put a brief in, it makes no sense. Those are your best people when it comes to data on the business side, typically, because actually you've got this silent majority, this 80% of data disengaged people who don't even consider speaking to you. So that same thing will happen when you roll this out. If you roll this out to 10,000 people, if it lands in their inbox as data assessment, most people will go, I'm not even involved with data. That can't be for me. So you're going to get bias towards people who actually have already got a level of engagement, enthusiasm, and behaviors. So you've also got to take that into consideration. And that's the challenge of that subjectivity versus objectivity. That said, it'll still give you a level of insight that's valuable in terms of building that business case, as I mentioned earlier. So, when should we do this assessment? Well, we've seen some really good reasons to do this. I think actually my favorite one so far that I've seen is when new CDOs and CDAOs come into the business, getting started with this type of assessment, I guess really gives them that idea of this is what this organization looks like today. So everybody comes in with an inkling that this new business will be exactly like the businesses they've been in before, where people maturity with data is low. But if they want to have fast impact and create fast change, the best thing to do is ultimately prove it. And that makes this a really good time. It gives you a breadth of insight, a depth of insight into the organization that you wouldn't otherwise get just by having one-on-one conversations. Equally, as we start to roll that data and AI strategy out and we start to think about those technology investments, we start to think about those process and AI investments, we have to be thinking about understanding the people too. And just in the same way as you might get one of the big four to come in and look at your infrastructure, look at your architecture, the time to do this is when you're thinking about the actions you want to take as part of that strategy afterwards. So obviously the strategy is an important document, but it's the operationalizing of that, the mobilization of that strategy that actually is the important bit. And this is a good time to do it when you've just outlined that strategy, because it'll direct you to the operationalization of that or the mobilization of it. If you've got and this comes back to this idea, which I'll talk about in a second, of key strategic cohorts, but if you've got a program of work which is implementing new technologies, new ways of working, new data products into departments, then that is the perfect time to start a data literacy and AI literacy program in that team and department. So it also makes it a really good time to assess the baseline you'll be working with, because data literacy, AI literacy drives adoption of technology, adoption of data products. There's loads of evidence we've got to show that, but we need that baseline to just show that in order to know who we're working with and what we're working with, that as we do that technology deployment is another really good time. But really, if you want to do a literacy program or a culture program, it's also a good time, right? That's another good opportunity to do it. So moving on now to what should you be looking to achieve through the assessment. So first of all, you need the obvious stuff. If we're going to quantify this, we need a visual overview of the results. We need to be able to quantify it against a set of understood definitions and measures. That kind of goes without saying. However, if you do this without the other things on this screen, you're going to struggle. So in order to get this mobilized across the org, if we're thinking 10,000 people might receive this in their inbox, you're going to have to let their senior leaders know this is happening. They're going to have to champion it. They're going to have to support it. They're going to have to encourage those people who don't see data as part of their world to complete the assessment. And that means that executive communication up front, then becoming champions for the delivery of the assessment, and a plan for that feedback loop afterwards to say, look, we said we were going to do this, you championed it and supported it. Now what we're going to show you is why we've got problems. All of that has to be structured before you actually start doing the assessment. It should show you your areas of strength and weakness, because otherwise, to Ant's point earlier, how are you going to make the use of the insights? We've got to be able to see the leveling, what people need to be learning and why, which departments have got bigger problems than others. That has to be in there. It should come with recommendations. Most people have not done a literacy program before. Still, we're in 2025. Most people in business, most data professionals, most data leaders have never championed or led a meaningful literacy program. So this should provide recommendations of where to go and why, and it should be based on experience and knowledge, not just random inputs. It's really good to have a series of workshops that follow where you're working with your data peers, you're working with probably the more kind of operational leaders in the business to carry the momentum from the assessment out of just having the assessment results into, now that we see that there's problems in this department, we're coming to help. Because people don't just want to put data for data's sake, like Anne said earlier. They want to hear that feedback loop of, now we're going to help you. So having a workshop environment or a webinar environment where you're feeding back to the people who are going to manage the people that need the support, that's going to keep the momentum within your program. And then ultimately, it's going to help you with your long-term strategic planning, because your literacy and culture program shouldn't be a one and done. It should be something that lives and breathes for the future of your data world, just like you expect your warehouse, your infrastructure, your architecture to. So it gives you a journey that you can prepare the organization for based on the insights that you've garnered from the report. For clarity, and I know this is partly for us a bit of a mini launch of this as a kind of gateway product that people can engage us with. Ours involves all of that, just so you know. An example of what that output might look like, or like a very small part of that output, but most importantly here, how do we link this back to the other ways of thinking about starting a literacy program? So, a structure that we've talked about a lot in previous webinars, and if you've ever been through kind of sales conversations with us, we talk about this loads. It's like the holy grail of how to start your program, is this concept of key strategic cohorts. So these are cohorts of people within the business who are more strategically valuable to the corporate strategy than the rest of the organization. So a good example of that would be if you've got a strategic goal to make data more widely understood and used, your management layer can be a really good key strategic cohort, because if you get that breadth of insight, awareness, confidence in data, they'll drive that down through the teams. Great starting point, great key strategic cohort. On the flip side of that, if you've got dedicated transformation programs going on in your commercial team or your finance team or your supply chain team, whatever it might be, those are really good key strategic cohorts, because the value of investing in that transformation is already understood. A lot of people have done a lot of work to set out the value of that transformation. So it makes sense to invest on bringing people on the journey. So that's always point one for us in terms of like, let's understand the strategic value of a group to the business. However, when we then get the insights from the assessment, and this is a working example from a previous client or a current client who've done this previously, anonymized, obviously. What we've got is a key strategic focus for this client that was in how to engage the customer, marketing, and improve, in essence, digital marketing conversion. When we looked at the assessment, we've then got really quite average at best levels of data literacy, AI literacy, and culture within marketing and communications. So when we were able to break down their long list of key strategic cohort options, because they had multiple transformations going on, we all know change is the only constant. We've then had ideas of working with managers and frontline workers. Actually, because compared to finance, where they already had, again, a transformation going on, so were a potential key strategic cohort, it was a no-brainer to go into marketing and communications, because the level was so much lower. There was such a bigger opportunity to lift the floor up there, find a lot of new use cases that could drive value and make it successful. So again, this isn't data for data's sake. This is how are we going to use these insights to combine with how to run a program well anyway, which is typically the key strategic cohort model. And these insights then drive the best place to go. And as I said earlier, that longer term strategic plan of we're going to go from here to here to here to here can be shaped and defined by where you've got the biggest opportunity or the lowest level to raise. So what happens after the assessment? Strategic alignment and cohort selection, that's what I've just described. So we're then going to target in that example, marketing and communications, because they're strategically valuable as part of that transformation in marketing and customer. And we've got evidence now that they've got gaps, they've got challenges. You're going to build a business case and a set of goals which shows how this program that you've designed or designed with a partner like us is going to deliver. Raising that level that you've shown within the assessment is low and is going to therefore have the impact on the marketing and customer journeys that data can have because we've raised that level. Then you're going to educate them and you've got to have your learning paths pretty much ready to go. Don't do this if you're not thinking, right, we can actually keep the momentum and pull the trigger. That is a big job in itself, one that we've covered many times in webinars. But again, obviously for us, that's a bit of a no-brainer. We can just hit the ground running with that. And then you've got to work out how you're going to do it again and again and again to scale the program to the wider business, because there's no point finding out that you've got gaps in 7 teams and then only dealing with one of them for the next 3 years. That's something that we see a lot with executive focus. if your data literacy program or your AI literacy program is thinking about the execs today in May 2025, and actually you haven't got a plan beyond the execs for late 2025 or early 2026, you can't just keep bringing the execs on the journey. They're not the be all and end all. They're not the holy grail. The business is where the value is. So make sure you've got a plan for scaling that more widely based on the insights from your assessment. In our world, very quickly, because I'm conscious of time and leaving some time for the Q&A, if you do want to have this conversation with us, and like I said, this is a bit of a soft launch of the formalization of this product, which we've been using for a while now with some of our clients. You can have a conversation with our team. We'll help you run a comms program and the assessment. So there's an upfront comms program that gets it out into the business. Then we'll help you do your analysis and your report creation and give you that body of evidence to kind of submit the business case. We'll help you engage the business people who need to see this as evidence and value, and that's obviously something we do an awful lot. And we will also give you the recommendations for improvement, whether you want to work with us or not, because this can be valuable in isolation, but most people we work with are thinking this is the first step in a much longer journey. And to be honest, as I said a second ago, it should be. Don't just do it for the sake of it. It's not a good use of your time or your money if you're just going to do it for the sake. You need to want to go deeper and take more of a stance around enterprise-wide literacy and culture, and that's really kind of an important element. And we're just over 12 minutes left. Anybody got any questions? I think some came in during the process.
We've got a question that I shared with you, Greg. Don't know if you can see it in the chat.
I can't see anything, Sarah. So
all right, I'll read it aloud. So Adnan asked, we've launched the literacy program in our organization. We've started data catalog initiatives, AI applications, governance trainings, etc. In your view, what are the must-include items in the data literacy program in an organization?
None of those. No. I guess I would suggest that lens on the literacy program is quite stick-led versus carrot-led. So we talk about this concept of like data carrot and data stick, and a lot of data offices have a requirement, and the more regulated your organization is, probably the more likely it is that you have to think about it from this lens. But things like data quality, data governance, data catalogs, gold, like MDM, it's just a bit dull. It's just a bit boring. And really what it doesn't do is sell the value of data. If we come back to this idea that the baseline for most people in your organization is they don't understand the value of data. They'll maybe give lip service to it, but if you actually get into it, they don't. A lot won't even give lip service to it. They'll be like, data's not a me thing, there's a team for that, or somebody like Julie in my department does our data, whatever it might be. Then go into them all out with just, it's governance, it's quality, it's rules, it's policies, all those types of things. You kind of you're not winning their hearts and minds. And I think for us, we lead all programs with change management, internal comms, winning hearts and minds. And then really like the confidence and the value pieces first, like how are they going to apply data to their day job? What business problems does it help them to solve? How do they stop using their gut, make better decisions through data, and then get their decisions right more often? None of those things are really about governance, or governance enables those, don't get me wrong, and it protects the data and it protects the data office. But if you go out with just that, the way I'll always position it, right, and this is the only analogy I've ever come up with, so if you've heard me do it before, I'm sorry, and if you don't get it, I'm also sorry. I love sport, and let's pick football, right? So I love football. I can watch it pretty much all day, every day. I watch it multiple times a week. My wife cannot stand football. If you ask me to referee a game of football, I already understand the value of the rules, the goals, the celebrations in the stands, and therefore I'll do my best to referee that game the best I possibly can. If you ask my wife to do it, she doesn't care about any of those things. She doesn't see the value in it. So she'll just get through that game as quick as possible, not apply any of the rules, and hopefully nobody gets hurt and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of the time we ask business people, whether it's stewards or owners or just your general population, to referee the data when really we've not told them what the value is. We've not taught them what the value is. They don't see the value in it. So they're not going to referee it how you want them to. So that lens of going out and just being like governance, quality, yada, 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 it's just not going to land. And it's the reason that people end up resetting programs like year two, year three, etc. So yeah, for me, yes, there needs to be the inclusion of those things in a program, but they cannot be the leading message because they're just going to put people off, make them feel managed and kind of like you're putting rules on them that they don't want. So the prerequisites of any good program, a change management, messaging that resonates with your end users about how data is going to improve their results, how data is going to improve their world, make their life easier, save them time, make them less painful in their day jobs. And then we buy the right to do the governance and that type of thing. So yeah, I think if I'm honest, it's a lot of the stuff that from the sounds of things you've not explored yet that need to be in there to make it work. Sarah, I think another question just came in, or there's a couple of things in the chat.
Yes, so I've put in our link for anyone who's curious to hear more about how we would approach the assessment with their organization. So far, no further questions, so seems
Okay.
like you've really covered the topic well. Yeah, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to our email address as well.
Cool. So I'll just wrap up by saying, remember that a subjective assessment isn't going to give you all the answers you need because of that Dunning-Kruger piece and the fact that when most people receive a data literacy assessment in their inbox, they might not think it's for them, and therefore you're probably going to get a loaded data set towards people who are already engaged, who've got a stronger, higher mindset and starting point than most people in the organization. So you've just got to be careful of it. You've got to kind of in your upfront narrative, you've got to build that into the conversation with your key stakeholders. Like the business case, we're going to put it together, but it's probably going to be an even worse case of worse state of affairs in reality than what we're going to be able to show you through the data, because that is going to be something that you have to really, really consider. As Sarah said, we're kind of launching this more formally now. I think it's going in as like our second most affordable product of all as a standalone product. So if people do want to get to the crux of where their organization is right now, we can help you do that. It'll also start to build that momentum of data and data literacy and AI literacy and awareness with the business through the comms plan that comes ahead of it. So do feel free to either visit the website and book a consultation, or you can contact us at hello@dl-academy.com. Otherwise, has one more question just come in, or is that was wrapping up?
Yep, we've got Chris asking how much does it cost?
Not going to tell you that on this. Depends how many people you've got in your organization, depends how much change management you need, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, we'll more than happy to have that conversation, Chris, just not in this forum.
All right, that's it.
All right. Cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. See you soon. Bye bye.